In June 20th, 1880, it was reported that a thunderstone had struck the house at 180 Oakley Street, Chelsea, falling down the chimney into the kitchen grate. Mr. Simons investigated. He describes the thunderstone as an agglomeration of brick, soot, unburned coal, and cinder. He says that, in his opinion, lightning had flashed down the chimney and had fused some of the brick of it. He does think it remarkable that the lightning did not then scatter the contents of the grate, which were disturbed only as if a heavy body had fallen. If we admit that climbing up the chimney to find out is too rigorous a requirement for a man who may have been large, dignified, and subject to expansions, the only unreasonableness we find in what he says, as judged by our more modern outlook, is, I suppose, that no one would suggest that bricks are manufactured in the atmosphere. Sounds a little unreasonable to us, because it is so of the positivistic spirit of former times, when it was not so obvious that the highest incredibility and laughability must merge away with the proper, as the Scientific American Supplement would say. The preposterous is always interpretable in terms of the proper, with which it must be continuous, or clay-like masses such as have fallen from the sky, tremendous heat generated by their velocity, they bake bricks. We begin to suspect that Mr. Simons exhausted himself at Notting Hill. It's a warning to efficiency fanatics. Then the instance of 3 lumps of earthy matter found upon a well-frequented path after a thunderstorm at Reading, July 3, 1883. There are so many records of the fall of earthy matter from the sky that it would seem almost uncanny to find resistance here. Were we not so accustomed to the uncompromising stands of orthodoxy, which, in our metaphysics, represent good as attempts, but evil in their insufficiency? If I thought it necessary, I'd list 150 instances of earth matter said to have fallen from the sky. It is his antagonism to atmospheric disturbance associated with the fall of things from the sky that blinds and hypnotizes a Mr. Simons here. This especial Mr. Simons rejects the reading substance because it was not of true meteoric material. It's uncanny, or it's not uncanny at all but universal. If you don't take something for a standard of opinion, you can't have any opinion at all. But if you do take a standard in some of its applications, it must be preposterous. The carbonaceous meteorites, which are unquestioned, though avoided, as we have seen by orthodoxy, are more glaringly of untrue meteoric material than was this substance of reading. Mr. Simons says that these 3 lumps were upon the ground in the first place. Whether these data are more preserving or not, I think that the appeal that this especial Mr. Simons makes is worthy of a place in the museum we're writing. He argues against belief in all external origins for our credit as Englishmen. He is a patriot, but I think that these foreigners had a small chance in the first place for hospitality from him. Then comes a small lump of iron, 2 inches in diameter, said to have fallen during a thunderstorm at Brixton, August 17, 1887. Mr. Simons says, "At present I cannot trace it." He was at his best at Notting Hill. There's been a marked falling off in his later manner. In the London Times, February 1st, 1888, it is said that a roundish object of iron had been found, after a violent thunderstorm in a garden at Brixton, August 17, 1887. It was analyzed by a chemist who could not identify it as a true meteoric material. Whether a product of workmanship like human workmanship or not, this object is described as an oblate spheroid, about 2 inches across its major diameter. The chemist's name and address are given: Mr. J. James Morgan, Ebbw Vale. Garden, familiar ground. I suppose that in Mr. Simons' opinion this symmetric object had been upon the ground in the first place, though he neglects to say this. But we do note that he described this object as a lump, which does not suggest the spheroidal or symmetric. It is our notion that the word lump was, because of its meaning of amorphousness, was purposely to have been the next datum standalone, remote, without similars. If Mr. Simons had said that there had been a report of another round object that had fallen from the sky, his readers would be attracted by an agreement. He distracts his readers by describing in terms of the unprecedented iron cannonball. It was found in a manure heap in Sussex after a thunderstorm. However, Mr. Simons argues pretty reasonably, it seems to me, that given a cannonball in a manure heap, in the first place, lightning might be attracted by it, and, if seen to strike there, the untutored mind, or mentality below the average, would leap or jump, or proceed with less celerity to the conclusion that the iron object had fallen. Except that, if every farmer isn't upon very familiar ground, or if every farmer doesn't know his own manure heap as well as Mr. Simons knew his writing desk. Then comes the instance of a man, his wife, and his 3 daughters at Casterton, Westmoreland, who were looking out at their lawn during a thunderstorm when they considered, as Mr. Simons expresses it, that they saw a stone fall from the sky, kill a sheep, and bury itself in the ground. They dug. They found a stone ball. Simons. Coincidence. It had been there in the first place. This object was exhibited at a meeting of the Royal Meteorological Society by Mr. C. Carus Wilson. It is described in the journal's list of exhibits as a sandstone ball. It is described as sandstone by Mr. Simons. Now, a round piece of sandstone may be almost anywhere in the ground in the first place, but by our more or less discreditable habit of prying and snooping, we find that this object was rather more complex and of material less commonplace. In Snooping Through Knowledge, October 9, 1885, we read that this thunderstone was in the possession of Mr. C. Carus Wilson, who tells the story of the witnesses and his family, the sheep killed, the burial of something in the earth, the digging, and the finding. Mr. C. Carus Wilson describes the object as a ball of hard, ferruginous quartzite, about the size of a coconut, weight about 12 pounds. Whether we're feeling around for significance or not, there is a suggestion not only of symmetry but of structure in this object. It had an external shell separated from a loose nucleus. Mr. Carus Wilson attributes this cleavage to unequal cooling of the mass. My own notion is that there is very little deliberate misrepresentation in the writings of scientific men, that they are quite as guiltless in intent as are other hypnotic subjects. Such a victim of induced belief reads of a stone ball said to have fallen from the sky. Mechanically, in his mind arise impressions of globular lumps or nodules of sandstone which are common almost everywhere. He assimilates the reported fall with his impressions of objects in the ground, in the first place. To an intermediatist, the phenomena of intellection are only phenomena of universal process localized in human minds. The process called explanation is only a local aspect of universal assimilation. It looks like materialism, but the intermediatist holds that interpretation of the immaterial, as it is called, in terms of the material, as it is called, is no more rational than interpretation of the material in terms of the immaterial. That there is in quasi-existence neither the material nor the immaterial, but approximations one way or the other. But so hypnotic quasi-reasons that globular lumps of sandstone are common. Whether he jumps or leaps, or whether only the frowsy and base-born are so athletic, his is the impression by assimilation, that this especial object is a ball of sandstone, or human mentality. Its inhabitants are conveniences. It may be that Mr. Simons' paper was written before this object was exhibited to the members of the Society, and with the charity with which, for the sake of diversity, we intersperse our malices, we are willing to accept that he investigated something that he had never seen. But whoever listed this object was uncareful. It is listed as sandstone. We're making excuses for them. Really, as it were, we're not quite so damned as we were. One does not apologize for the gods and at the same time feel quite utterly prostrate before them. If this were a real existence and all of us real persons with real standards to judge by, I'm afraid we'd have to be a little severe with some of these Mr. Simonses. As it is, of course, seriousness seems out of place.